Good morning. Good morning. Everybody get your last cup of coffee and have a seat. My name is Sharma. I'm so glad to see you all here today. I'm with Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light, and Reverend Steve Hancock from our church here is going to welcome you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Steve Hancock, one of the pastors here, and it's a privilege for me to welcome all of you to Second Presbyterian Church on behalf of our congregation and staff. We're delighted that you are here, and we're delighted to be hosting this conference and this workshop. As most of you know, for too long, the church has been guilty of, either by silence or by actions, colluding with those who exploit nature and beautiful creation God has given us. But a day like today gives me hope that that is changing. I see what is happening with Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light, and things happening out at Ferncliff, and conferences and workshops such as this, and it really does give me a sense of hope. So I'm delighted you are here, and delighted that Second Church can be a part of this. One of my favorite quotes is from Richard Rohr, who said, "The best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better." And I hope today can be a day we can learn and be inspired to be better in our love and care for this beautiful creation that God has entrusted to us. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Gracious God, grant us the grace to grow deeper in our respect and care for your creation. Help us to recognize the sacredness of all of your creatures as signs of your wondrous love. And help us turn from the selfish consumption of resources meant for all, and to see the impact of our choices on the poor and the vulnerable. Almighty God, you created this world and gave it into our care so that we might serve all people. Inspire us to use the riches of creation with wisdom, and to ensure that their blessings are shared by all, and that trusting in your bounty, all people may be empowered to seek freedom from poverty, famine, and oppression. All this we ask in your gracious name. Amen. Amen. Again, thank you for being here, and welcome.
So much so you can see why we love our church here. We are trying to hold a zero waste event today. So you will see not only trash cans in each classroom, but also recycling bins. And they're also in here. And not only are we going to try to recycle, but at lunch, right after lunch, we are going to try to compost. So there will be volunteers to help you figure out what goes in the compost bin, what goes in the recycle bin, and what just goes in the plain old garbage. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish today, and people are here to help you with that. I want to ask Leanna Gildner to stand up. Leanna is from the 2nd Congressional District Office, and that's the district in which we are meeting here today. So I want everybody to get a chance to know Leanna and engage in conversation with her today. Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light earned an EPA Environmental Justice Grant last fall. So after the grant application was approved, somebody somewhere had to approve the release of the federal funds. Now maybe that was Congressman French Hill, I don't know, but I have a feeling that somebody like Leanna was pulling for us and putting in some good words for us to make sure that we got that grant, and we're very grateful for that. So I wanted you all to meet Leanna. Okay, we have take action tables and information tables in the back. So today, not only are we attempting to increase awareness about environmental issues from a faith-based perspective, we also are trying to move people from awareness to action. So you'll see cards, you'll see petitions, you'll see letters, all voluntary, but take some time to do that. Let me show you some examples. You'll see cards like this. that go to the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, asking them to protect the Buffalo River. You'll see cards like this to Senator Tom Cotton and Senator John Bozeman, and there are cards like this to Congressman French Hill, asking him to join the Bipartisan House Climate Solutions Caucus, which is set up to be evenly distributed between Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C., and I think it's up to like 120 or so members right now, like 60 Republicans and 60 Democrats, and we would certainly like for Congressman Hill or any congressman from Arkansas to join that bipartisan House committee that's just seeking solutions. Okay, then we have some postcards like this that go to Senator Cotton and Senator Bozeman. They're over on the right-hand side. If you want to sign one of those and fill it out, you can leave it there on the table. I've already written Senator Cotton and Senator Bozeman on a lot of them. These did not arrive in the mail until late yesterday. Well, I was kind of writing on as many of them as I could last night. I am going to Washington, D.C. the first week of May, and I will take all of these cards that you sign with me and hand deliver them to the offices of our representatives in Washington, D.C. Whether they're from the Little Rock area or not, I'll go by all of our the offices of all of our congressmen and also our senators. So leave your cards here, if you will. We also have some very important letters that go to the members of the Public Service Commission. So there's one to each of the 3 members of the Public Service Commission, and they're addressed to Dear Commissioner. If you will sign your name 3 times, that is an important, timely issue before the Public Service Commission right now that has to do with whether or not the little guys are going to be able to still play in the solar energy sector. You know, the world, our country, our state, we're transitioning to clean, renewable energy, and we want to make sure that the little guys get to compete in that effort just like the big utility providers. So if you'll sign one of those letters, then we'll make sure that they get hand-delivered to the members of the Public Service Commission. Let me see, what else? Oh, okay, I put some blank cards back there. Like, if you don't like what I wrote on the cards, I tried to be very polite. But you can write your own card. You know, I just was very polite about the things that we're asking our representatives to do. We also have a sheet back there. If you live in Little Rock, if you will sign asking Little Rock to ban plastic bags and styrofoam. So we'll, as many people as want to today, and sign that, and we will take it to one of our representatives at our City Hall. Let's see, what else have I forgotten? All of this is all voluntary, by the way. Okay, I told you about the copies on the tables, about the breakout sessions, where the signs are. Make sure you save your ticket stubs. We're going to give away some great door prizes today. Keep your water glass or your coffee cup with you if you take it with you to a classroom, so that you can continue to use it throughout the day, so that we're not continually washing more glasses. We're going to try to be as environmentally friendly as possible, and all of the things on your table, you try to notice those. We've tried to pick out things that were environmentally friendly. Everything in your packet was printed on paper that is 100% post-consumer recycled. That goes for your file folders too. So just notice the things that are on your table, and those also will be given away before the day is over. Now, if somebody close to the back doors will get the basket with the ticket stubs, we'll go ahead and give away 3 door prizes right now. How does that sound? So everybody check your tickets.
And we'll turn it into compost, which next year will be donated to the Heifer Urban Farm, and they'll probably buy greens. So don't feel guilty if you're throwing away your food today, because it's going to be food next year. We're set up outside. We have a little bit of information. I'll go ahead and just kind of read one of the little cards we have right now. The average American throws away 1.3 pounds of food a day, which equals 467 pounds a year. Every year, 40% of all of the food grown in the United States is put into a landfill. And every pound of food waste that goes into the landfill produces 4 times its weight in greenhouse gas emissions. So, what can you do? We have a home composting service we would love to take your food scraps and your money, but also we advocate doing it at home yourself first. If you've not tried it, come to one of our workshops. We can teach you how to do it. It really reduces the footprint. We don't have to drive around, pick it up. You don't have to take it anywhere. It is a little bit of work. So if you've done it and you don't necessarily like what the process is, it's a little dirty and time-consuming, we'll come around and pick up your food scraps, turn it into compost, and return the compost to your home twice a year, or we'll donate it to one of the schools that we work with or the Heifer Urban Farm. So that's it. Anybody who does sign up with us today will get a free month trial. So if you don't like it, no harm, no foul. If you do, we look forward to working with you. And eat as much as you can, and we'll take care of the rest. Thanks, guys.
Now, we have so many door prizes. We're going to give away 4 more right now. So here we have our basket with the ticket number, so check your tickets. The first door prize that we're going to give away is a gift certificate at the Green Corner store, a $20 gift certificate. So who is the lucky winner of that? Ticket number 438631. Okay, so now Reverend Hill is going to bless our meal. Thank you so much.
I know some of us are a little conflicted because if we weren't here, we'd be involved in March for Our Lives. But we committed to this before that became, so in spirit, I know many of us would be want to affirm our connection with those who are at the Capitol this morning. I just wanted us to pause and remember that 20 years ago today, at this very hour, about 10 minutes from now, we in Arkansas experienced the largest school shooting that had been in the U.S. to that point. 4 students and a teacher were killed, 10 more wounded by shooters who were just 11 and 13 years of age at Westside Middle School. 4 months later, 68 of those 200 children that were on the playground at that point, 5th and 6th graders, came to Ferncliff for a special week of camp. They brought their backpacks and their teddy bears and their deep post-traumatic stress, and through a week of tears and hugs, they experienced the powerful role that nature can play in healing. With hikes and recreation, labyrinth walks and campfires, those children were so changed that the parents begged us to continue to do it, which we did for 5 more summers until they graduated. So as we're gathered here to make the world a greener place, there are young adults and thousands of other marchers who are doing their best to nudge the needle to make our world a safer place. Let's remember those today affected by school violence as we bless our meal. Let's pray. Creator God, we thank you for this chance to gather with kindred spirits, and we ask your blessing on this meal. We pause to remember all that we are and all that we have comes from you, and to say thank you. Heal us each and heal us all through the amazing power of your sustaining creation. Bless us who gather today to make our communities greener, and those who march to make our communities safer. This we pray in the spirit of all our faith traditions. Amen.
Dr. Katharine Wilkinson. She is the senior writer with the book Drawdown, which is our conference is based on Drawdown. I first heard about this book last spring, right as it was being published. And I learned that Katharine had earned a degree in religion from Sewanee University. So then I later learned that she went on to complete further studies in environmental topics. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get Katharine Wilkinson to come to Little Rock for a conference? So with some help from our friend Johnny Chamberlain, who's from Little Rock, he put me in touch with Katharine, and we had some email conversations and some phone conversations, and she flew in this morning from Atlanta, and we're very happy to have her with us. Her bio is printed on your agenda, which is in your packets. But for starters, I want you to know that she worked for the Natural Resources Defense Council, which we know as the NRDC. That is one of my favorite organizations, and I donate to them on a regular basis. The NRDC is a champion for protecting the environment and safeguarding the planet. I donate to them because when laws are violated, when laws to protect people, planets, the wilderness area, and the environment are violated, the NRDC not only advocates, but they file lawsuits, and most of them are very successful. Also, Katharine taught at Oxford, and she is the publisher of Between God and Green. We gave away one of her books a little earlier, and we have more to give away today. So I give to you Dr. Katharine Wilkinson, and she's here to talk to us, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi. You don't hear me?
Yes.
No, not so much. Better? A little bit better?
Yes.
Much better? Okay, if it's not good at any point, just, make a motion. Normally I start by asking who in the audience has heard of Drawdown, but given that you all are here today, I'm going to guess we're 100% on having heard of Drawdown. Who's read the book? Hi. Read the book. Has anyone heard Paul Hawken talk about Drawdown? He has not come to Little Rock yet. Anyone in the audience have a child who was a research fellow for Drawdown? Oh yeah, okay. That is unusual and really, really fun. So I want to start today. Let's see if this clicker will work. It will. Where I think every good and rigorous climate talk starts, which is with emojis. I used these for the first time on a college campus, and then I was like, actually, this is sort of universal language these days. So I've been sticking with it. But there's kind of a basic story that we have been hearing and telling each other about climate change, which is, it's bad. The science tells us hold please. We may have a dying battery. Well, hang on. Let's just see how we go. Okay. The science tells us it's bad. The science tells us, looks like it's going to get really bad. We are headed towards a potentially unlivable planet. We're not super well equipped as a species to change course in response to big, diffuse, long-term systemic challenges. So change your light bulbs, recycle your Coke cans, and cross your fingers, right? For some kind of silver bullet tech and/or policy solution. Like, gosh, let's hope they figure it out at the UN. I don't know about you, but when this is the only story that I hear or find myself telling, I end up feeling depressed, overwhelmed, hopeless, paralyzed, deeply afraid, guilty. A whole host of really reasonable emotional and psychological responses, but they're not a very good foundation for action, when action is exactly what we need to be taking. They leave me more in that emoji monkey, who's covering his ears and his eyes and his mouth, and just kind of wants to hide in a hole. I think even worse, there's an underlying narrative to this particular story. That human beings are terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, greedy, lazy, incompetent, intransigent, and all the rest, right?
About sums
You
up.
kind of step back from the story and you're like, why do we want to save this species again? This is not a lot of fun. It isn't the whole story. Oh yeah. Better? Okay. I'm serious about the violent arm movements, okay? Somebody commit to that for me. Who's gonna be the arm movement person if it gets quiet? Perfect, okay. I think we're okay. I think we're All right.
That was
I'm gonna
not.
say that. So the other side of the story, at least in part, is what we tried to bring to life in this book. Drawdown is the product of a nonprofit called Project Drawdown, based out in Sausalito, California. We are a living research and communication project focused on mapping, modeling, sharing, educating on the most substantive solutions to address global warming. And we try to do that in a much more comprehensive way than anyone else has done, a much more granular way, but also a much more accessible way. So Paul Hawken, our founder and executive director, found himself kind of asking a similar set of questions over a number of years. Like, do we have a list of solutions? Do we know what we're supposed to be doing? Do we have any kind of apples to apples comparison of the technologies and the practices that are already in hand, they're already working, but how much can they each move the needle on addressing emissions reductions over some period of time? He was hearing a lot of folks in the climate space in response to things like Bill McKibben's article that came out in 2013 in Rolling Stone, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, which was indeed terrifying, and for good reason, right? But folks were saying, I think it's game over. We tried, it didn't work. You know, oh well. And Paul being Paul, he's a little bit of a contrarian, and his sort of antenna went up, and he said to himself, and probably many others, is it game over or might it be game on? It's a fine line between those two. So I think about our work as doing the math on what is possible, based on what we already have in our toolbox. And I think about our work as bringing that message, an understanding of that toolbox, if you will, to life in not yet another dry and wonky and impenetrable and deadly boring climate report, but a book, and then we hope, we think, a Netflix series and some other communication mediums that are really accessible, that might evoke some wonder and some curiosity and some fire in the belly. Because if we've got this toolbox that we know is working, we need everyone to understand it, to know what's in it, pick the tools that they love, and get to work scaling these as quickly as possible. We are very much a collaboration. So we had 65, I think, research fellows who have worked on this project at one point or another, scattered across 22 countries, 6 continents. We have now about 130 really fantastic advisors who are experts in all different aspects of climate science, policy, action. This really was a labor of love of a lot of folks, and then a very small, kind of small but mighty staff, we think. What's in a name? Drawdown. This will be the only Al Gore-ish slide of the day, I promise, but it's helpful for context. So many of you have probably seen this or something like it. These are the fluctuating levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 400,000 years. And We're now, I think the latest reading is we're hovering right around 409 so far this year, parts per million of carbon dioxide. That's just carbon dioxide. If you added in other greenhouse gases in terms of their carbon dioxide equivalent, we'd be up around 490. The sort of bottom line of this is that human beings have never lived in these atmospheric conditions before, not anywhere close. We are in terra nova already. And yet what we hear in the context of climate change is, let's slow emissions down. Let's reduce them. Maybe we'll get to zero. Maybe we'll get to carbon neutral. Well, when we're already living in terra nova, the idea of slowing or stabilizing in conditions that our species has never lived in before, that seems a bit mad, actually. Why haven't we been talking about that, right? I was in Jackson, Mississippi in October, and spent an hour or so in an auditorium, a huge auditorium full of 8th graders, which is one of the more terrifying experiences of my life. But we looked at this chart together, and I said, so if this is the problem statement, what would we want to do? And this sort of, a very exuberant young man said, yeah, right? As Paul would say, if you're driving the wrong way towards a cliff, you don't want to go over the cliff more slowly, right? You want to turn around and head back the other direction. So that is really what we're talking about when we're talking about drawdown. It means the point in time at which the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere could, hopefully will, peak and then begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. And that is the big goal for humanity, as far as we are concerned. It's about a threshold after which we head back towards conditions that are most conducive for life on this planet. We also hope that it's a goal that is more accessible for people, right? 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, 400 parts per million, 350 parts per million. I mean, I don't know about you all, but those don't mean very much to me, kind of in my gut or in my heart. I can kind of wrap my head around them, but even then, I don't wake up in the morning thinking like 1.5, But I could wake up in the morning thinking reverence for life. Conditions that are conducive for life, a climate fit for life. That I can get excited about, and I think that that's really important. The word mitigate. So Paul and I are both sort of word nerds. The word mitigate, right, which again is like that's a huge part of our game plan. We're going to mitigate climate change. It means to make something less severe or less painful. To lessen the trouble caused by an evil or difficulty, like a slightly less evil. I'm not sure that's the world that I want to live in or work towards. What we discovered is that hang on. Come on. Okay. We discovered actually that human beings have been creating a plan to get to drawdown. We just didn't realize that that's what we were doing because we've been in churches and backyards and laboratories and companies and schools and halls of government, kind of testing, learning, refining, and trying again in all these different interesting practices and technologies. And along the way, we've built up a really incredible body of data about the tools that are already in the toolbox. And so our job at Drawdown was not to get on a whiteboard and make up what we thought the most comprehensive plan to address global warming would be, but actually to gather the collective wisdom that humanity already has, to codify it, to do the math in such a way that we can look at things apples to apples and rank them because everybody loves rankings. we got this incredible honor of being a mirror back to humanity of what we already know and what we're already doing and what we can do because of what we already see at play. There are basically two things you can do if you want to get to the point of drawdown. This is the one that we talk about the most. Stop sending greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere, whether that's through renewable energy, efficiency, protecting ecosystems, et cetera, et cetera. We have not talked so much about this one, which is bringing carbon back home. And bringing carbon back home through the incredible carbon capture technology of photosynthesis. Nature has been at this for 3.8 billion years. Carbon ends up becoming this villain in the story of climate change. But carbon is a really critical building block of life. Like, we all better be saying some, you know, some amens for carbon in our own bodies. So the issue is not carbon, the issue is what we've done with it. And we need more carbon back here, back at home, in plants and biomass and soil, and less of it up there. We organize the work by sectors, both in the models that our research team did and in the book. So electricity, food, women and girls, buildings and cities, land use, transport, and materials. There are 80 solutions that fall into these categories, and I like to think of them as the trains that have already left the station. So they're out in the world, we see them working, they're already scaling, we need to scale them a heck of a lot more. But sort of the proof is in the pudding on these solutions. And then we also included in the book, not in the modeling, 20 coming attractions. So these, again, are technologies and practices that are, maybe they're more nascent, they're still in research and development. In some cases, we know they work, we can see them in the world, we don't have the same kind of richness of data from which to do the same math that we did for the others. This is the top 20. Can you all read this? Ish. They're ranked based on their emissions reduction potential, and there are some pretty interesting insights in what shows up in the top 20, some surprises, some unsung heroes. So what I thought we would do is kind of, I'll tease out a few of the insights, touch on a handful of the solutions. Obviously we can't do all 100, and we'll go from there. So the first really striking thing is that food, what we produce, how we produce it, and reducing waste so we don't have to produce quite so much. It's 8 of the top 20 solutions, and it's the largest sector of impact overall. I don't know about you all, but that is not what we tend to hear about food. You may never have heard of number 9. There we go. Anyone have a guess what number 9 is? Silvopasture. There are people who have read the book. Silvopasture, from the Latin for forest and grazing. Conventional wisdom tells us that trees and cows don't live in the same place together. But actually this is a really ancient practice of integrating nut or fruit, crops, timber, forage, livestock, that has a whole host of benefits for the land and for farmers. You can imagine having multiple products coming to market on different timelines, insulates you from risk, lots of great stuff. The kicker from a drawdown perspective is that a pasture with trees compared to a pasture without trees will sequester 5 to 10 times more carbon in the soil. Not rocket science, right? Just some trees in pastures. And as you can see here, there's a big upside for farmers. To the tune of about $700 billion over 30 years. Let's talk quickly about the numbers. So the first one is that emissions reduction potential of this solution. So if we took silvopasture from where it is today, scaled it vigorously but plausibly between now and 2050, this is the impact it could have on reducing emissions of carbon dioxide. There are solutions that touch on different greenhouse gases or multiple greenhouse gases. What we've done is convert all of them into their carbon dioxide equivalent. So you'll see everything expressed in terms of reduction in CO2. And that's so that we can do the apples to apples comparison. It's what drives the ranking. This is actually a good slide for talking about numbers. So GT is gigatons. A gigaton is about 1 billion tons. A cow weighs about a ton. So you can imagine 1 billion cows is about a gigaton of carbon dioxide. In 2016, we emitted about 36 gigatons of carbon dioxide, so about 36 billion cows worth. We looked also at the economics of these solutions. We looked at the cost to implement, right? So if you're gonna change from a regular pasture to a silvopasture system, what's that gonna cost? And then we looked at the economics of operating a solution over 30 years. So in this case, how much more money are you going to make as a farmer? Take an electric vehicle. What's the additional money you're gonna spend to purchase an electric vehicle as opposed to a gasoline-powered car? How much money are you gonna save over 30 years, or less potentially, for the lifetime of one given car? How much money are you gonna save operating that particular solution? Sorry, y'all. Food waste, the number 3 solution. These are rejected carrots and potatoes that are too ugly to sell in a supermarket. If you want to just like a good cry, I highly recommend Googling food waste. Fully 40% of the food we produce in this country is not consumed. And you can imagine that at every stage of the journey, from farm to truck, to storage, to processing, to grocery store, to kitchen, to, there are implications for greenhouse gases. We cut down forest to grow more food that we don't eat. And then oftentimes, if there's not an awesome composting system in place, that organic matter ends up in a landfill where it produces methane as it decomposes. We didn't even include the methane impact in this number in an effort to be conservative. And still, this is how much impact reducing food waste could have over 30 years. In France and Italy, it is just simply illegal for grocery stores to throw away food. So guess what? It ends up in the hands of people who need it, maybe on a pig farm. Like last case, sort of, last option would be a compost heap. Best by, sell by, use by, these labels, it's a total circus. I don't know about you all, but it's hard to make sense of them, and that's because they are basically unregulated. Has nothing to do with safety. It mostly has to do with when the food manufacturer thinks that the food will taste best. So we end up throwing away lots of perfectly good food. I think it's exciting that this is a solution that anyone can impact immediately and at no cost, and actually probably at savings. And the same is also true of the number 4 solution, which is plant-rich diets, which comes in just behind this one in terms of impact. Cows, if you ranked them as a nation from their methane production, would come in 3rd behind China and the US in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. That's how much of a problem methane is. Livestock production, roughly 18% or so of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. Again, something anyone can do something about the second they choose to. Electricity probably might have been folks' guess of what the number 1 sector would be. It's the 2nd sector overall, 5 of the top 20 solutions. And I think it's important just to note that So often our conversations about climate focus almost exclusively on energy, right? We're like, climate, it's an energy problem, it needs energy solutions, and some more efficient transportation and buildings. Just not the whole story. Even if we get to 100% renewable energy by the middle of the century, we do not get a hall pass into the 22nd century. We have to go way beyond clean and renewable power. I love this photo so much. This is an Uru family. They live on Lake Titicaca on a sort of reed island, and the mother is rightfully incredibly excited because this PV panel is going to give them electricity at their home for the first time, which means these girls are not going to be doing their homework by kerosene lamp anymore, which is not a good recipe for indoor air pollution and health. It's not good for black carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. Also, of course, not good if you live in a reed house on a reed island. We could have picked, right? We could have picked a photo for this solution that was like, you know, a drone shot over some, you know, Southern California neighborhood with rooftop solar panels. We all basically know that story, right? There's huge opportunity for rooftop solar in high-income parts of the world, but it has huge, huge opportunity as well for the 1.1 billion people around the world who don't have access to electricity today. And we're not going to build grids to go to all of those places, nor do we need to. So we've tried to use photography in this book also to add dimension, tell other sides of the story, bring things to life in a slightly more unexpected way. Land use focuses on ecosystem protection, ecosystem restoration, some biomass solutions like afforestation and bamboo, which Chamberlain's son worked on. I want to talk about one of my favorites, which is peatlands. The ground itself is kind black butter. That's how Seamus Heaney described Irish bogs, which I just think is great. All of a sudden, one line of poetry and you know most of what you need to know about peatlands. They're just layers and layers and layers of decomposing organic matter. And they're about 50% carbon, which is why they've been used as an energy source for a long time. They're under threat from forestry, farming, fire. They're only about 3% of the Earth's land area, but they're second only to oceans in the amount of carbon that they hold, twice as much as the world's forests. So peatlands are potentially a very concentrated problem or a very concentrated opportunity. Doesn't take that many hectares of protected peatlands to make a real impact, which I think is very cool. Okay, Matt, it's your moment. The number one, I am sorry to say, is not very sexy, but it is really, really important. And this focuses on the chemical refrigerants that are in our air conditioning systems, cold chains, vending machines, refrigerators, you name it, they're everywhere. Hydrofluorocarbons came into use after the Montreal Protocol mandated the phase out of chlorofluorocarbons, which were causing, in part, causing the ozone hole. HFC is great because they have almost no negative impact on the ozone layer, but they turn out to be 1,000 times or more as potent as carbon dioxide in their heat trapping abilities. So solving one problem, incidentally contributing massively to another. The world agreed in the fall of 2016. We were a little distracted with an election, but this did happen, to amend the Montreal Protocol to mandate the phase out of HFCs around the world over the next couple of decades. So that's coming, and there are great alternatives to HFCs as refrigerants, including carbon dioxide, which maybe Matt, you all can talk about in the breakout some more. But in the meantime, we've got loads of these things in circulation, right? So we have a huge opportunity to address leaks and disposal, and disposal in particular is when about 90% of emissions of HFCs occur. Huge opportunity, 90 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent of potential emissions to avoid over 30 years. Oh yeah, didn't show you guys the picture. Mac, this is also something we should talk about. This is one where like there are not cool pictures, so maybe we need to stage like an awesome photo shoot for the second edition of the book. Women and girls, this is a sector that kind of leaves, I think, some folks with wide eyes or scratching their heads. There are 3 solutions in this sector, and I'll do a deeper dive on them this afternoon for anyone who's interested. But they all focus on advancing women's rights and opportunities and well-being, and then the positive ripple effects that that ends up having for society and for the planet. Number 6 and 7 in particular focus on the impact of closing gaps, current gaps on access to education through secondary school and access to high-quality voluntary family planning and contraception. So these are really about giving women things they say they want and don't have today. This is another one of my favorite photos in the book. There are 130 million girls who are school age but not in school around the world today. You can imagine all of the reasons why that is concerning and why it's a huge opportunity to support girls in staying in school through high school. It turns out that with more years of education, and we know this from our own story in the US, with more years of education, women choose to have smaller families, and the children that they have are healthier and have more resources invested in them, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the 2 ways in to having fewer feet making their carbon footprints as of mid-century. Not through that terrible, long-time focus in the environmental space and others of population control. This question comes up a lot still, and I am extremely emphatic. It is the wrong verb, and it's the wrong noun, actually. This is about choice. It's about empowerment. It's about enabling families to manage the size and the spacing and ensure that they are best able to care for their children. It's not about control, it's not about dictating, it's not about setting a number and then steering society to get there. And I think it's really, really important to kind of flip that script. If you add up educating girls in family planning, empowering women and girls is the #1 solution to address global warming. It's not the only solution, but it is hugely important in a way that we just don't hear and we don't talk about most of the time. But ultimately, it's not about the #1 or the top 5 or the top 20, right? We have an entire system that has created this challenge, and we need an entire system to shift it. Paul loves to make a joke. Like, gallbladder, that's pretty small. Want to get rid of it? Okay, maybe you could let that one go. We need all 80 of these solutions and coming attractions and then some, right? There is no such thing as a small solution because of the way they are knit together. And what I love is that when you look at this kind of full mosaic of technologies and practices, it becomes really clear that there's a foothold of action for every single person and every institution and every community on the planet, right? Which I think is like the best news, right? I want to share, again, just a couple of coming attractions that will give you a little bit of a flavor for what's in the book. This is one that actually we are already getting help from. We're seeing these wooden skyscrapers go up around the world using high-performance timber products cross-laminated timber, and glulam, which I didn't know anything about until working on the book. And what's amazing is that they are as strong as concrete and steel because of the way the wood is layered and glued. They actually do better in earthquakes. They even do better in fire because, as you'll see, you can see this in the forest, right? The outside of wood will char, but then the internal part will retain its structural integrity. I could really geek out on these for a while. What I think is particularly important, though, from a drawdown perspective is twofold. So one is that producing concrete and steel has huge emissions associated with it, about 10% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. So if you can use wood that is sustainably grown, maybe through afforestation, and is a carbon sink, well, dry wood is about 50% carbon, so you can start to imagine buildings being these kind of long-term banks, right, of holding stored carbon. So you get that double benefit of both avoiding emissions and sequestering and storing. Obviously, sourcing is critical. I'm sure there are some forest folks in the room that are like, I don't want to building with wood. Yeah, building with wood from native forest, not a solution, right? And again, this is something that we try to do throughout the book. Paul and I called them the yeah buts, right? So this is an amazingly powerful solution, except, or not in this circumstance, or as long as these different things are managed, which was really important as well. You can tell we were getting a little punchy towards the end of creating the book. All the other solutions have just like a very normal descriptive name. A cow walks onto a beach is about a species of red algae called Asparaginus taxiformis that, it turns out, thanks to the discovery of a farmer on Prince Edward Island, if fed to cows and sheep, to ruminants that produce methane, as about 2% of their feed, it can cut methane emissions by 70 to 90%. Totally wild, right? Red algae, seaweed. Again, of course, there's a huge question of like, well, how could you possibly produce that much seaweed at scale? No silver bullets, right? But maybe some silver buckshot, of which this could be one part. I want to come back to where we started, with the emojis, of course, and this dominant story arc of doom and gloom and threat and fear, and it's probably game over. When you come through the lens of solutions, I think this fuller and truer story starts to appear. It's not that none of this is untrue, particularly the science and the psychology embedded in this story. But when you look at these solutions, like, you can't help but hear the story of humans. We're also creative and compassionate and collaborative, and sometimes we show up in ways that are gutsy and even brilliant. And I think if we want to stay engaged and committed in this work, that is the story we have to believe in, right? That's the story we have to hear and tell and own. And my gosh, if we want to quadruple, some much bigger number than that, the number of folks in this room, like post haste, because that's what we need to do. This is the story, I think, that brings people in, right? Let's make this like a party that people want to come to. I think sometimes we forget about that. The climate movement has gotten really, really good at giving an I have a nightmare speech. And can you imagine if King had stood up at the March on Washington and said, "It's terrible, people, please get busy." But that's basically what we've been saying. It's an easy speech to give when you look at the science of the problem. And as so many of us do, follow the reports that are coming out day in and day out with bad news. But what's the clear and credible and exciting vision that's actually worth getting out of bed and working towards? Beyond averting catastrophe, What's the dream? And I hope that Drawdown is one contribution to that vision, to that positive possibility that we might work towards together. Because what we start to see, in addition to addressing the yeah buts, we try to tease out the co-benefits of these solutions, the many positive ripple effects. And we begin to see like, oh, yeah, okay, emissions, gotta tackle that. But these are also means towards building a more equitable, vibrant, prosperous, just, healthy world. And that is what I think is really exciting. And that's the kind of opportunity that all of a sudden opens up, I think, a much broader tent and much more common ground for folks to work together. We're not saying the bar's not high. We're not saying the odds aren't long, but we do have a map of possibility before us. And it's that sense of possibility. You know, folks ask a lot like, well, gosh, Drawdown is so optimistic. That is so wonderful. Or, are you hopeful? Drawdown didn't set out to be an optimism project. We set out to do the math. It turns out that there's some good news there in terms of what we've been up to on the side of solutions. I think about the idea of possibility as being the really important one. I don't know where we'll land. I know that the work itself is good. And I come back again and again to a wonderful poem from Mary Oliver's most recent collection, which is where I'll end, and then we can do some Q&A. She writes, I have refused to live locked in the orderly house of reasons and proofs. The world I live in and believe in is wider than that. And anyway, what's wrong with maybe? You wouldn't believe what once or twice I have seen. I will just tell you this. Only if there are angels in your head will you ever possibly see one. And I think that's the ultimate call to action for us. Yes, it is to do the nitty-gritty work on refrigerants and solar panels and silvopasture and all of the rest. But it's also to sustain that vision of what is possible. And to support one another in continuing to hold a vision of what is possible, because it can be really hard work to do that. But I think that's actually the ultimate #1 solution to address global warming, is having a sense of where we're going together. I'll leave it at that. Should we do some questions, comments? Yes.
If I raise cattle, how do I get into silvopasture? Do I plant trees in the pasture? Do I move to a different location? How much land, is land use going to change as a result of that?
That's a good question. Are you a cattle farmer?
No.
Is there anyone in here who has had their hands in silvopasture before? Okay. So my understanding, I'm a vegetarian, so take this all with a grain of salt, because I haven't personally been involved. Pretty simple to make a transition from a piece of land that is a treeless pasture to a silvopasture system. It takes some amount of investment, some labor, and some time, obviously, to bring that fully to life. What you end up seeing is that you have cattle that are pretty much as productive, if not more so, but you have additional products also being grown on that same piece of land, which is why you see, I forget what the exact number is, maybe 40 or 50 billion to implement globally at scale, but about 700 billion of increased revenue over 30 years. Yes?
Thank you. You mentioned that these are all things that we can be doing, and we can be addressing. And I'm a little bit wanting to hear more about that. For example, with the food waste situation, you said so much of the food gets thrown away, and the process of being delivered from the farms to the stores. So what can people, everyday people like us, do to help fix, for example, that situation, and also the solar situation and the wind farm situation, and the silver pasture situation, and many of those that you mentioned?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I'll say is that no one can do everything. You know, I actually really think that the environmental movement has gotten it wrong in terms of telling people, do this, don't do that, this is good, this is bad, right? It becomes quite puritanical. You know, it's not a lot of fun. And I often say to folks, I hope you will use Drawdown as a choose your own adventure story. You cannot possibly do it all. But is there anything in there that stokes a fire in the belly? Go there. Follow the joy, right? We're so attuned to like the world's hunger and the world's needs, and I think we forget to do the check on the fire in the belly about what brings us gladness in the process of working on it. So I want to set that context first. On food waste specifically, in this part of the world, in regions of high income, most of the food is wasted by choice at the end of the supply chain. So it's mostly happening when it reaches the grocery store is saying, nope, we're not going to take it because our customers won't buy it. Or it's getting home into your refrigerator and you're forgetting about it, or you overbought, or restaurants serve huge portions, or right, it is really happening at the retail and consumer level. There are some interventions earlier. They're more important in lower income parts of the world where food may rot on a farm because there wasn't access to market, right? Or there wasn't labor to harvest it. Or it could be something as simple as like an airtight container would dramatically improve storage and avoid pest infestations. So there are some really important supply chain interventions, but those are mostly in other parts of the world. So you can make a huge difference just day to day as a consumer of food and a purchaser of food. Compost we actually call out as its own solution in the book, so it's even additional to the numbers that you saw here. I think on any of these, right, there are different scales at which you can engage. So if you're really into like battling it out at the Capitol, right, work on renewable energy policy at a state level. Or maybe you want to figure out how to do a microgrid with your neighbors. Or, you know, again, any number of things. To me, again, just coming back to that piece of like, is there something that you find particularly exciting or interesting, and how do you want to play with it, is the advice that I would give.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you know how big food chains like Kroger's feel about disposing of their extra food, whether they're willing to compost it, whether they're willing to give it away to others, and how we might affect how they do it?
So there, Kroger, I know somewhat intimately because they used to be a client of mine in a former life. They have a big partnership with Feeding America and lots of food banks. So usually food bankable food is often finding an outlet, particularly in in cities where you may have a very active food bank that's creating the infrastructure for that. I don't know about compost and grocery stores. Maybe if you want to weigh in on that.
Sure. There are some laws around it. Several of the grocery stores around here have started to work with, there's a company that's recently come to our region called, Organics with an X, O-R-G-A-N-I-X. And they pick up from, they'll provide a dumpster for organic, pre-consumer only at this point. In some places around the country they're doing post-consumer as well, but they're doing pre-consumer pickup of all the produce that's not able to be sold. And then, so if you're a Kroger and you're paying $100 a month for this 50-yard dumpster, they'll say, well, roughly, 50% of that's going to be food. So pay $50 for this dumpster, and we'll give you another dumpster for $40. So you're saving money there. And then what Organics does is they take that food waste and they resell it to farmers for slop. So it is happening. It's happening in all the Walmarts in this region right now, and selectively in some of the Krogers. The Urban Food Loop is starting to work with Natural Grocers and Whole Foods, some of the smaller ones. We've contacted Kroger. We've tried to get in touch with them about it. It's a corporate decision, and so it's taking us some time we're trying to set up tables just to tell consumers, hey, this is what you can do on a household level. And they're like, well, we don't really know about that. That's going to have to be a corporate decision. And we call corporate, and they're like, that's a store manager's decision. So we're kind of getting the runaround, but there is infrastructure happening from a different level. A company, this Organics company, has found a way to make a little revenue off of larger grocery store chains like that. Specifically, Costco and Walmart are the ones they're working with right now. But Kroger has started to do that. I know my people in Kroger has. But where it's going, I don't know. But I know that they are diverting.
Thank you. Yes, I think, Charmel, do we have time for one more?
I was just going to add to that a little bit. So I work in the local food system world in my full-time job, and I do know that there are some food recovery efforts happening, definitely up in Northwest Arkansas. Tricycle Farms, which is out of Fayetteville, they use Vista and other AmeriCorps service members, and they are partnering with other organizations, with local grocery stores in the Northwest Arkansas area, recovering food from grocery stores, bringing that back to their facility, and then redistributing it to food banks, churches, and other places. So it is happening. I don't think it's statewide yet, but it's definitely happening in pockets in Arkansas. So I think that churches can play a real role in that, in serving as a place that has volunteer support, has the capacity, kitchen, storage space, things like that to serve and fill that need, to take that food and be able to get it back out to the folks who need it in our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you all so
Everybody.
much.
Thank you so much.